Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to Keystroke Live. Today we're going to discuss vendor catalogs. Vendor catalogs are a new feature added to version 7.15. They are an advanced POS feature and you can consider vendor catalogs to be lists of inventory items or lists of items that are available from your vendors that are not yet in your Keystroke inventory. These would be used for things like price lists from your vendors, where again a vendor may offer a large selection of items. You don't necessarily need to add them all to your Keystroke inventory, but you want the availability to add items selectively, add items as needed. I'm going to just jump right into to our vendor catalogs here. And start with some practical examples right in Keystroke. All right, this morning I have initialized some brand new Keystroke data. There's a completely new Keystroke database, no customers, no inventory specifically, and we'll see as soon as I go into my sales manager, you can see wrong data. Let me open the correct data set. Okay. And let's make sure that this is sharing. Okay. We see here I am at a new data set, newly initialized data, only a single clerk, and more importantly, we're going to see, again, no inventory items at all. We're starting with stock number 1. I'll go ahead and just create one just so we can see a record. So again, here we are, brand new data set, very little, no inventory in there yet. We can associate vendor catalogs with an actual vendor, so obviously I'm going to want to have my first vendor created in this data as well. We'll just call this 1 and vendor 1. Simple as that. I have one vendor. So let's say I've got a list, a price list from my vendors of inventory offered by these vendors. I want to associate that entire list with a vendor without bringing that into inventory. We'd use a vendor catalog. Vendor catalog can be added to Keystroke in one of two ways. Either by importing a vendor catalog, it's very much like importing inventory items, or vendor catalogs also use the Keystroke inventory database format, as in an existing Keystroke database file, such as ksinv.dat. So we can take an existing inventory database file and associate that file with a vendor, and that file, that inventory database file, becomes the catalog for the vendor in question. And that's the first method I'd like to demonstrate, is using an existing database file to create a vendor catalog. Now, the vendor catalogs are stored in a subdirectory of your data folder. Today, I'm going to switch real quickly to my DOS prompt so you can see what I'm changing here. So, for today's purposes, I'm working in a data directory named KS Live. The vendor catalogs will go in a subdirectory of the data folder named catalogs. So I'm first going to actually create a catalog directory. Let's browse to that directory. Here I'm going to actually copy an existing Keystroke inventory database file in as a catalog. Each catalog file needs to have a name that corresponds to the vendor's number. Vendor number 1 has a catalog file named vendor 1. So that's what I'm going to copy in from another data set, from our tutor data, which is very well-known inventory. So again, if I want to attach an existing inventory database file to a vendor, I copy that database file to the catalogs directory with a name corresponding to the vendor's number. This is vendor number 1. So the file I'm copying will be named 1.dat in the catalogs directory. There's my file. Let's go back to our sales manager here. Now, I'm going to pull up my list of inventory again in the sales manager. And right away, here we see our single inventory item here. But right away, you're going to notice something a little new on this screen. Right around the center across the top, we now have a catalogs button. Okay, this allows me to browse vendor catalogs that exist in or that are associated with my vendors. So I select my, I only have a single catalog at this time, and so when I select this button, as you'll see, I've got catalog for vendor number 1, vendor 1, the name of my vendor. And these look very much like items you're all familiar with. This is a copy of the tutor inventory database that I've assigned as the vendor catalog for vendor 1 in this blank data set. Let's just pick an item here. Any item really. I'll just pick a video game here, and we see the copy item parameter. Item has now been added to inventory as stock number 2. I now have 2 items in my inventory. I just immediately copied an item from a vendor catalog. And we can have multiple catalogs, catalogs associated with each vendor. Let's go ahead and expand on this just a little here. I'm going to add a new vendor. We'll just call it vendor 2. Let's keep things simple here for demonstration purposes. I want that to match. So again, I had mentioned that there are the 2 methods of creating vendor catalogs, using either an existing Keystroke inventory database file. This could be a file that an employee has sat down at a terminal and worked in a blank data set and just created created an inventory database directly in Keystroke. It's familiar to them. They know exactly what fields they want to assign value to, or what fields they want to complete, and so on. So a user could sit at a machine creating a Keystroke inventory database from the ground up, or, as is going to be very common, vendors will provide a price sheet, usually in a delimited format. Well, we import that delimited file in as a catalog, just as we would import any other data in Keystroke. Let's go over to our importer. And as I go under the setup menu, again, we see in the importer, under the setup menu, we see a new option for vendor catalog. All right. Screen looks very identical to the same import screen. You all know. I'm going to pull up a simple delimited file I've created. Okay, so here's a really simple delimited file I have created. I've just named it test.inv. Very limited information here, but obviously a vendor's price sheet would probably include far more information. For our purposes, I'm only including a description, a product code, a cost, and a price. So again, not unlike any other delimited file you've ever imported into Keystroke in the past. So I will leave our setup file assigned as ksimport for now, but again, the setup file, just as is the case with every other import, the setup file holds the settings to be used for the import process. Import file, I named testinv.txt. All right. I'm not importing a number, but I am importing a product code. That is field 2 in my file. Description is field 1, and my cost is field 3. My price is field 4. And I'll put the same list price. And I can do we'll do last cost of field 3 also. So again, looks very similar to importing an inventory item. It's fairly indistinguishable from importing inventory. I'm going to add new items. We will be merging, so don't merge would be non-applicable here. We're going to select that. Just up to import. And again, on the import menu, also the new vendor catalogs option, we're going to merge. Now, this function behaves slightly differently than other import functions. Here's where we're actually specifying what vendor we are importing a catalog for. So, as is the case everywhere, insert's going to show me my available vendors. I'm going to select vendor 2 in this case. Keystroke will prompt that no catalog currently exists for vendor 2 and prompts me to initialize. I will. And now it wants to import the data from my delimited file, testinv.txt, again into 2.dat, the vendor catalog file that corresponds to the vendor. Real simple. Right in, 3 read, 3 added. Now, when we go back to let's go back to Sales Manager. So here we are in the Sales Manager, and again, we'll use our lookup function to view our existing inventory items. We have one item that I had added, one item that I had copied from a vendor catalog. Now I select our catalogs function. Now, because I have more than one vendor catalog, I do get this prompt to select which catalog I'd like to browse. I'm going to select the existing button to see which catalogs exist. Let's go to vendor 2. These are the items I had imported. All right, and they're available in my vendor catalog now, and they can be added to inventory. Now, when are you most likely going to add items from a vendor catalog to your Keystroke inventory? Typically during a purchase, when you're creating an order for one of your vendors. So here I have some vendors. Go to vendor 2. I create a transaction for vendor number 2. Now, I happen to know that, well, let's see, I'm going to order, an item that is actually in the Keystroke inventory. All right. Just as, again, no difference here. I know I have an item that's available from vendor 2 that has a product code of 123456. Okay. It's not an item that's in the Keystroke inventory, but I know it's an item that this vendor carries. So I add that to the transaction, and I get a prompt that, again, is a new screen. Item not found. Copy from vendor catalog. I'm going to select yes. This item is now in the Keystroke inventory database. So Again, I'll hit insert. Here I have another item. Okay, this was copied directly from the catalog. I didn't have to look it up. I didn't have to see what items were available from this vendor. Imagine a clerk sitting at the counter with a catalog from the vendor, actual document that they're paging through and see a part that they need to order. Well, if that catalog has been assigned in Keystroke, has been associated with the vendor in Keystroke, all we need to do is enter that product code, enter a lookup field for that item, and Keystroke is going to copy it from the vendor catalog into the Keystroke inventory database. So again, just to review the vendor catalogs, they are data files that are stored in the Keystroke data directory. They are stored in the catalogs subdirectory, where each file is going to have a name that corresponds to the vendor it's associated with, the vendor number that it's associated with, and we can use an existing Keystroke inventory database file, a regular old ksinv.dat, that we just copy over to a new name in a new location, and it becomes associated with that vendor number. Or we can go into importer and import in a vendor catalog from a delimited file. Again, that's fairly common that a vendor will provide a price list, usually in an XLS format, sometimes already in a delimited file. Did anybody have any questions up to this point? Was there anything that anyone would like to review before I continue?
How easy is it to replace that vendor file?
Oh, simple. It's as easy as either if you get a completely new price sheet from your vendor. Again, that's probably the most practical application here, is that the vendor is going to provide a file to you that will either already be in a delimited file or we'll have to manipulate into a delimited file. If you get a new price sheet, let's just go right back to our importer here. This would be the same as importing updated information into inventory. Maybe the vendor's prices, as in your costs, change. So, and that's a great example here. Why don't we go ahead and do that here? I'm going to go ahead and pull up our inventory list. So I'll pull up our inventory list, and here are the items from vendor 2. Let's say this item number 3 that I have here, I just got a new cost on this item. All right, the vendor is no longer selling new item 3, to me at a cost of $5. Their cost went up to $6. Well, I can easily re-import that. Let's go back to my text file here. Let's see. All right, so back at my test file, my vendor catalog items, here's my new item number 3, product code 987654. Here's my cost of $5. That vendor changed that cost on me. It's now $6. Exit and save. Let's go ahead, and we're going to re-import that data, that new information from my vendor. So I'm going to use the same file, and in fact all the fields are exactly the same. Again, this brings me right back to the setup file. You create a setup file that holds all the parameters that will be used, let's say for just a specific vendor's price list. We could call this setup file, in fact, why don't I do that? I'll call this setup file vendor 2.
Hey, Jay,
And,
we can't see the screen yet.
oh, okay. I'll go right back. Okay, so I have created, and I will just delete it and recreate it here for demonstration. I can't do it from here. So I've created a new setup file just named vendor2. When we're viewing the lists of setup files, just insert to create a new file. I created this file, called it vendor2, and this setup file will hold all the parameters that I'll ever use to import new inventory items or updated vendor catalog items from vendor 2. So, same parameters here, and in this case I am merging, I am updating existing inventory items, or existing vendor catalog items, and I'm going to base that upon the second field in the file, what I'm calling, what is designated as the product code. Add new items is appropriate, even though there are no new items to be added here, but when you get yearly or quarterly price lists from your vendors, sure, there will usually be new items, and you will usually want to merge existing items, just as we're doing in this example. So I'll select OK, and then just right back to import and vendor catalog and merge. And again, this is, I need to specify which vendor I am importing catalog information for. It's going to be vendor 2. There it is. Import from test.invtxt to 2.dat. There it goes. Go to my catalogs, vendor 2. There are my items, F3. There's my new cost. So I've just imported a new cost. So yes, when you get updated information, even outright brand new information, very easy to import that into an existing data vendor catalog. Any other questions regarding importing or using vendor catalogs? Not hearing a lot of questions, so it sounds like everything has been well understood up to this point.
I got one more.
What's that?
I got one more.
Sure.
What happens if the vendor changes his product code on you?
Well, that comes down to the same thing. Either we make a manual adjustment, or we would have to, in that case, it's probably going to be a manual adjustment if it's a product code, unless we have other means of identifying these items. We could, let's say the description stays the same for all of their inventory items. Well, in that case, we can, right back under the vendor catalog import setup, maybe we want to merge by description, or another indexed field, or class, or any other unique field that indexed field that we can identify on the item. I'd say description is probably going to be a good match. So if item ABC, item with product code ABC, gets changed to product code XYZ, but the description has stayed the same, then I would say let's just re-import merging by description, and Keystroke will read in the new product code in the file and update based on what has been read.
Heath has a question here in the chat asking if this is the best new way to handle integration with Bicolog, and I believe it certainly could be.
You know, I'm not going to lie, I've been here 10 years now, and Bicolog was even a little before my time.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I hear it pretty frequently already. I think it was, perhaps it was Ken Bailey that I think may have used that exact description. Oh, this is just like Bicolog. Well, you know, if he says so, then I'm inclined to agree. But you know, again, I think it really is sort of a substitute for the functionality that that Bicolog provided. I know Bicolog was at one point a default setup file in the importer, so Keystroke was already somewhat inclined to import items from Bicolog through the importer. Well, now we're not. I'd say it's, yes, very similar to Bicolog, except for the fact that we are not importing directly into inventory here. That's the major distinction. We can have a Keystroke inventory of only a couple hundred items, where you have a vendor that supplies 10,000 items. Well, those 10,000 items from that vendor can now reside in their own catalog, and you can selectively add those items to the Keystroke inventory. So, yeah, Nick, you could probably say if it's more like Bicolog than I could, but yes, I have already heard comparisons to this.
You could probably create a vendor catalog for all the items on the Bicolog CD or from online.
Sure.
And then just treat that vendor catalog just like any other vendor catalog.
Absolutely.
But you would need to get the stuff off the CD into its own Keystroke vendor catalog file first for it to work this way.
But yes,
the old Bicolog allowed you to go into the Bicolog software, tag items for export, and then Keystroke had a setup where it automatically invoked the importer to grab the files that were tagged and exported from Bicolog directly into the Keystroke live inventory. So if you wanted to set up a vendor catalog file for Bicolog, just import the Bicolog information into its own catalog file first.
Right, right. And for argument's sake, we can call the vendor Bicolog or Bike Parts, what have you. So yeah, that's an interesting comparison, because it's not the first time that it has been, you know, posed to me that is very similar to Bicolog. And yeah, it again, what it's accomplishing is letting us have items on standby, so to speak. They're not in our inventory yet, but they're very easily added from the vendor catalog to inventory. Can be added in sales, but again, more commonly, you're going to add these items when you're in the purchase manager and you have this vendor's part number, this vendor's product number, and you want to immediately bring that item into the Keystroke inventory. All we do is you know, scan that item or enter that product code, and Keystroke will identify that it's currently not in your inventory, but it does exist in the vendor catalog, and it'll allow you to copy it from the catalog into inventory.
Jay?
Yes.
This is Jesse. I have a question.
Sure.
On that example of where the cost went up to $6 from $5, but it didn't update the list price.
Right, right.
$10.
Right. The importer does not recalculate your selling prices. The importer only takes what is in your import file and puts that on the database record. So if just the vendor cost, at that point, we would use other Keystroke utilities such as the search and replace or search and update price to change our selling prices, to change the Keystroke selling prices, or we could have it changed directly in the import file. But yes, the importer only imports data into the databases. It does not perform actual price calculations.
Jay, is there a way of importing multiple codes, alternate codes?
For a vendor catalog, not at this time. Vendor catalogs again, are only going to import what you'd have on the same information that you just have on a database record. Alternate codes, again, one way to think of it is that the data you'd import into the vendor catalog wouldn't require any alternate codes because it's the data that's coming from the vendor. It is essentially already, one way to consider it is that it really is already an alternate code. So this would be the information from the vendor that you're importing into the vendor catalog. So it's not necessarily your own identifiers and such. This is the information that you're getting from your vendor.
Okay, I have a vendor that has 3 different codes for each item.
Mm-hmm.
3 different barcodes for each item.
I see.
I'm not exactly sure.
Well,
why,
at that point, what I would say is until that item becomes, or once that item actually becomes an inventory item, you know, we're only going to use a single, we're not going to have any alternate codes assigned for that item. So yeah, the importer won't import alternate codes. Alternate codes can be imported onto inventory records with a separate utility. But yeah, if an item comes from a vendor, that's something of a unique situation where they're going to give you 3 fields. And in this case, maybe we assign that as 3 separate indexed fields on the vendor catalog record, such as the product code on the vendor catalog record, such as the alt ID number, perhaps the class. I'd say let's use these identifiers as actual indexed fields on the database record. Did anyone have any other questions regarding the vendor catalogs, either importing using existing keystroke files or adding items to the keystroke inventory from a catalog and so on?
Jay, I have a question.
Sure.
I noticed in the example that you used that when you imported into the vendor file the updated price or cost,
right?
If a handful of those items from the vendor catalog had been imported into the keystroke inventory, would we have to do a separate import to update
That's
those
a very
records?
valid point. Yes, because they're no longer just, they're no longer just in the vendor catalog. They are part of the inventory database at this point. So yes, when we import into import updated information into an existing vendor catalog, the items that have already been added to the keystroke inventory are not yet affected, because now they're no longer considered vendor catalog items. They're actual keystroke inventory items. So this will, and that's a great point. We can use the same information, the same exact information that is in your new updated vendor price list. We can merge that into the inventory database as well, while not adding new items. That is a case where we would disable the add new items. So let's say we needed to update both the record in the vendor catalog as well as the record that is now already in the keystroke inventory database. Well, we can take that same exact import file and use essentially the same parameters here. We'd have to, it would be now importing into inventory, but we would take that, and why don't we go ahead and do exactly that here. I can demonstrate that just as easily here. We would be merging in the updated information from the vendor's price list, from the delimited file, now into the inventory database. So that's a great example, and that was Keith that had that question. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great one, and let me demonstrate that. I will take my, let's just verify what I did copy in inventory, go to catalogs. This headset is remarkably uncomfortable today. All right. So I believe I copied in this item. Yep, new item 1 is definitely what I copied in. We've got the base price as, we got the base price is 2, the average cost is 1, and let's double check that's what I've got in inventory. Yes. All right. So we're going to say that the average cost, or that the cost of this item, product code 123456, has now gone up to $1.50. All right. So I'm going to take this same text file, okay, and as Jesse noted earlier, importer does not calculate prices, but for our purposes here, why don't I go ahead and just update this price as well, update my price as well, just so we can see a clear difference on the item itself. And let me switch back to, okay, so I changed that item, and just as we did the import earlier, I'm going to do it again, and we'll see that the vendor catalog updates, but in this case, the inventory item isn't going to update. So here, in the catalog, this item has been updated. I'll go to inventory. In the inventory, the item has not been updated. This is, oh, I'm sorry, wrong item. In the inventory database, the item, the record has not been changed. However, I've got those changes in the same delimited file. I can import those changes right into my inventory database. Inventory setup, that was under inventory, and so the same setup file is available to me under the inventory setup. All right, again, the only distinction that we're going to see on this screen is in the title bar. We see that it's inventory setup, not vendor catalog setup. It's the same import file. Same data fields. Oh. Now, in this case, okay, because I only want to import those changes from the vendor's price list to existing inventory items. This is an important detail. I do not want to add new items from my vendor list. So I'm going to leave that blank. I'm going to merge by product code. All right. So again, I'm just running the same process, the same or a similar import, just as I would to update the vendor catalog. Now I'm going to update the existing items in my Keystroke inventory. Okay, read them in. Only the one record was updated. That's the only change in my Keystroke inventory. I go to my inventory. Again, now I'm looking at the inventory record. I can tell already that my price has changed, my cost has changed. So it is sort of a double pass, so to speak. We got to take two passes at it. One pass to update the information that is in the vendor catalog itself, and one import to update the actual inventory records from that same information. So it's definitely something that can be done there. Just have to, and maybe you don't want that to be done. Maybe because you bought it at, when you bought it 2 months ago from this vendor at a cost of $1, maybe you don't want your inventory record to reflect the new $1.50 cost change. Maybe you do. If so, we just import it into inventory. Any other questions or thoughts on vendor catalogs? Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this morning. I'm glad we had an opportunity to show off this new feature. This is something that so far has been very, very positively received by our dealers and anyone that has, as well as our users. More than a couple of users have decided to make the upgrade from Keystroke POS to advanced POS just for this feature. Again, there's just so many applications where a vendor has just a vast catalog that we have no need to have all of those items in Keystroke, but want the accessibility to easily add those items to Keystroke inventory. So it's been a very positively received function, and I'll look forward to hearing any thoughts or ideas that any of you have
I'd like
on
to add
using
one
vendor
last thing, Jay.
catalogs.
This is Nick. For those of you who had audio problems today with the GoToMeeting or weren't able to log in for the beginning of the session, I'll try to have this posted up on our YouTube channel as soon as I can get to that file today. All right?
All right. Well, again, thank you all for coming today. And next week, join us at the same time. Next week will be hosted by SBS President Michael Gebb. And thanks for joining. And please feel free to call technical support with any questions regarding anything we discussed today. Thanks, and have a great day.